Welcome to September's monthly build, and right off the bat I want to apologize for bringing this to you guys just a few days late, but we'll get to why that is in a moment. As you will soon see, this is way more of a because I think this might be fun kind of build as opposed to a this is practical kind of rig that I usually dive into in this series. But let's roll that intro and then we'll get right into things. Got one of these and need to know how to cool it? Check out Enermax's all-new Lictech TR42 series of coolers, featuring a full-cover copper baseplate, rubber vibration-dampening radiator pads, and an all-new block top design with addressable RGBs. The Lictech is designed specifically for the new Threadripper 2 series of CPUs and comes in both 240 and 360mm flavors. Check out the link in the video description to learn more. The reason that this video is coming out a few days after September has expired is that this massive case from Cooler Master was under embargo until today, and no matter how much I begged and pleaded, they wouldn't let me sneak this build in a few days early. This is the Cosmos C700M, and much like the rest of this system, it's pretty impractical for the vast majority of consumers. Not only is it almost the size of a Case Labs SMA 8, but it also tips the scales around 50 pounds without any components in it at all, and the cavernous box that it gets delivered in weighs almost 70 pounds. My FedEx guy wouldn't even talk to me for a week after it showed up. It's got addressable RGB lighting strips along the front, top, and the bottom. The GPU can be mounted conventionally, vertically, or in a wacky chimney orientation with the included riser cable. The front I/O is robust, and of course it has that trademark Cosmos curved tempered glass. While I wasn't a huge fan of its predecessor, the C700P, the new styling and features of the C700M are really appealing, and I'm curious to see if the build experience lives up to the hype. And the price, because it is $430. Of course, we're going to be filling this baller case with baller hardware, and what's more baller than 32 cores and 64 threads of AMD Threadripper madness. Even though the 2990WX has, for now, lost its spot in my daily editing rig to the 7980XE, it's an enormously powerful processor, the likes of which we just have never seen before in the consumer market. With Nvidia's recent driver updates breathing life back into the gaming performance of the 2990, even though that's not what it's intended for, hopefully we can see some respectable frame rates in addition to stellar workstation performance. Housing the 2990WX will be the latest from Gigabyte, their crazy X399 Aorus Extreme. Designed specifically to handle the power demands of an overclocked 32-core part, it features actual finned heat sinks mounted over the VRMs. Connectivity is also pretty absurd, as the I/O sports not only dual Intel gigabit ports, but also a third that can handle 10 gigabit speeds. AC Wi-Fi is there if you need it also. There are 3 heatsink protected M.2 slots and handsome RGB effects all over the place. Even the back of the board is covered in what Gigabyte calls a nano carbon base plate to help with thermal dissipation. Pretty serious stuff. We'll be slotting in a 4x8GB kit of tried and true G.Skill Trident Z RGB DDR4 3200 memory. This kit is known to play nice with Ryzen, and clocking it up to its rated speed should be no problem at all. But what else can we plug into the motherboard for our completely impractical system? How about one of Nvidia's brand new GeForce RTX 2080 Founders Edition cards? In my review of this bad boy, I found that it performs on par with the 1080 Ti, meaning that although perhaps pre-launch expectations were not really met, it's still a beastly GPU and will tear through most titles at 1080p and 1440p, and even most games at 4K should see an average FPS over 60. Rounding out the build today will be the latest cooler from Enermax, designed specifically for the Threadripper 2 chips, the Lictech TR42 360mm AIO. The block is designed specifically to contact the entire surface of the IHS, and for this new revision, Enermax has also enhanced the block top with You guessed it, RGB LEDs. With a cooling capacity of 500 plus watts, maxing out our OC should be no problem. For power, there's no reason to revert to anything reasonable here, so we'll stick with our overkill theme and use the Corsair HX1200i. Storage is always the last thing I think about in these projects because it's highly dependent on the user and is the easiest thing to expand, so I'm just going to build this machine with a paltry 480 gigs of M.2 storage provided by the HyperX Predator SSD. It's fast and it's tiny, just like, well, never mind that. Not wanting to break our streak of mixing and matching different manufacturers' parts, I'm going to spruce up our interior with the new Thermaltake Ring Trio fans, which I couldn't fit on this table. I did an entire video on these comparing them to the Corsair LL120s, and let me tell you that these things are downright awesome. They'll do a much better job of looking the part inside of our case than the stock cheap black plastic fans. Now that I've laid my insanity out before you on this table right here, let's see what it can do when it's all put together. Although my hoodie remains the same for continuity's sake, it is actually now the next day. This was maybe the most time-consuming build I've ever done on the channel that didn't involve a custom loop. And even though I worked on it until about 1 a.m. this morning, I needed to catch some Z's before I passed out, so I delayed this post-mortem until today. As you guys probably noticed, this is the first monthly build in a while that I didn't put up performance metrics for, and that's for a couple of reasons. The first is that as I started to run my first test, which was Metro Last Light for those of you guys keeping score at home, I just kind of thought to myself that this is a terrible use for a machine like this. Both the CPU and the GPU are better at actual meaningful number crunching than they are at playing what amounts to frivolous games. This would be a ridiculous machine for deep learning tasks, AI functions, and complex scene rendering and modeling. And to be honest, I'm just not quite as familiar with those types of benchmarking programs, nor was I sure that the majority of my audience would want to see those results. Secondly, I don't really think that the 1080p Far Cry 5 benchmark result is actually relevant, because I don't think anybody's actively searching for those numbers with this hardware combination. With that said though, I am willing to keep this together and to test it for you guys on some non-standard benchmarks if the demand is there. Let me know down below what benchmarks I should run that would be appropriate for a build like this, and I'll be sure to do a follow-up video soon. With that out of the way, let's talk about the build process and the case itself. The C700M is an improvement over the C700P in both form and function. The exterior aesthetics, despite the sheer mass of the case, are a home run. The modified front panel and the RGB effects all around, combined with the curved tempered glass that I think has just the right amount of tint, makes for a great showpiece on your desk. The pre-configured front panel cable management in the rear chamber is drool-worthy, the included fan and lighting controller works well, and the handles are sturdy for maneuvering even a fully loaded and extremely heavy rig. Cooler Master has included a lot of accessories here in the box as well, as you get a bunch of drive mounts, a long PCIe riser cable, multiple pump and reservoir mounting plates, a vertical GPU mounting bracket, and even a 5¼ inch optical bay. But it's not an A+ all around. Maybe stemming from the criticism of the original H500P, every part of this case, with the exception of the top cover, is screwed in place. And I don't mean by 1 or 2 screws, I mean by 4 or 6 screws. Doing any work in here at all is laborious, and it took me over an hour just to rotate the motherboard tray and configure the chimney effect GPU mount. It's definitely better to have a sturdy case held together by screws than one that's flimsy and falls apart, but I think we reach a point of diminishing returns when I can't access the front fans without removing 6 screws on the front panel and 2 on the radiator bracket. Getting back to that chimney mount, it's definitely a really cool aesthetic innovation. And honestly, I don't know of any other manufacturer who is implementing something like this at all. It really gives the interior of the case a distinctive look and feel, and it helps fill out that cavernous interior quite well. However, functionally, it's only maybe a 5 out of 10. While the airflow situation seems fine, because of where the video outputs are now located, you actually have to run your DisplayPort cable inside the chassis from the back grommet up here and up above the motherboard to plug in all the way at the other end where your GPU is. This might not be so much of an issue if the motherboard wasn't also rotated, forcing the I/O to be at the top inside the case. With my top-mounted radiator and fans, I was left with not enough room to plug anything in at all up here, and I had to rely on the front case ports for a USB Wi-Fi dongle and to plug in my keyboard and mouse. Also, when you configure the GPU like this, you need to use the riser cable, which is both too short and too long at the same time. It's too long to just run directly across to the nearest PCIe slot, as there's a huge amount of excess this way and you end up having to try to bunch it up somewhere and it covers your CPU block and your memory modules. But it's too short to run it under the motherboard tray and then back up to the slot that way. And I actually had to plug in a second riser cable to make it reach. Granted, you run into none of these problems if you just leave the case in its stock orientation, but this is a major selling point of this chassis and part of what makes it unique. Not to mention that the instructions for performing this maneuver are straight up awful. This may be the worst instruction manual I've ever seen on a product that really needs one. The diagrams are small, hard to decipher, and are accompanied by a complete lack of detailed written description, leaving me to just kind of guess at how to do things and what parts to install in which places. When I rotated the case, there's literally nothing in the manual about relocating the GPU mounting bracket, which comes from the factory screwed into the PSU shroud. I had to unscrew it, then unscrew all the drive caddies on the rear wall. Then I had to remove 2 reservoir mounts, and then I had to figure out how to mount the bracket. Not only how to mount it, but how high to mount it and where. There's also nothing that addresses how to connect and run the riser cable. This is clearly not a case meant for beginners, but when somebody like me struggles with it, there's probably some room for improvement in the instruction manual. Moving on from that debacle, the doors need a better closing mechanism. The rear door of my case pops open just way too easily, while the front door actually ended up being kind of hard to open. Maybe there's some issue with poor tolerances that can be fixed with more precise tooling at the factory, but I can't have the rear door swing open whenever I move things around a bit, and at the same time, need a crowbar to access my internal components from the front. On a lighter note, the airflow out of the top is very good, and the intake from the front, while not topping any charts, is definitely sufficient. I didn't do any specific temperature testing, but again, I can do some in a follow-up if you guys want. The whole build is also really quiet, likely a combination of the thick glass and premium fans used. As you guys can tell, I can't even hear it and I'm sitting right next to it. So overall, what do I think of this monstrosity? Well, it looks gorgeous, but it has questionable functionality for most users and is completely impractical price-wise and size-wise. I doubt many engineers in a lab who need all of this hardware would put it in a blingy case like this, and I doubt all the gamers out there who want as much RGB as they can get would be buying a 2990WX. But it was fun, kind of an out there project, and now I could say that I built a crazy system like this just, for the heck of it. And I could get back to putting together more practical systems. So let me know down below in the comments what kind of build you'd like to see coming up. Also, don't forget to get subscribed to the channel if you are not already. And as always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.